Hello and welcome. Here we are, day 3 of the Sacred Father series. Took a little break yesterday, but we're back. So, today we are going to be talking about the wounded father. So, this is a very interesting topic because it is one that can have widespread effects, right? And deep lineage type of effects. Similar to the devouring mother that we talked about. These are the ones where these show up in a deeper shadow form, and they also have their light invitation and their invitation for healing. So let's talk a little bit about the wounded father. Who is he? So the wounded father is a man who is carrying his own unresolved trauma. This is whether this is through addictions, rage, depression, or even emotional dissociation. He may be physically present, but emotionally completely absent. Or in the other form, he might be unpredictably reactive. So he might be really unstable and you're not quite sure what's going to happen. So his presence can be both feared and yet longed for because he is still the father archetype, right? So this archetype is not inherently bad as a whole because he is human, he is raw, he is unfinished, right? But when this is left unintegrated, his wounds are going to bleed into the next generation. So this is what I was talking about, where we talk about this one because there are lineage, there are long ancestral lines that can happen because of the wounded father who is not healed and is not integrated. So some of the traits of this wounded father we're going to talk about, remember also the light and the shadow. So the shadow is his instability. The instability makes it very hard to predict what the expectation is of what's going to happen when he's around. Also, they can be self-medicating, they can be emotionally avoidant like we were talking about, and completely volatile. So some of the light, now this is the light that comes from the wounded father if he is in his healing, is self-awareness, open-heartedness, and deep bravery. So deep courage, deep bravery to really look honestly at his own wounds, and also within that comes this compassion and this understanding of other people who are walking through some of those same paths and some of that same healing, exploration. So often the wounded father is both the protector and the harm bringer unintentionally, right? So this is similar to like the devouring mother, where she is very loving, very connected, but also, or not but, and also obsessive and controlling and smothering, where he's the protector because this is his territory and this is his family, but he's also the harm bringer because of his own wounding, right? So what might lead someone to be or step into this wounded father archetype? And this is really important because if we can look at this as somebody who has maybe had a wounded father, we can look at this from a place of more of compassion rather than, I want to say resentment or just icky feelings. There's another word I can't think of at the moment. Anyways, so what might lead a man to be in the wounded father archetype is severe childhood trauma or abuse that he received as his own. That goes back to the old saying, hurt people kind of thing. This can often be suppressed grief or rage. That's why this month of men's mental health awareness is so important, because when they do not have a space, not just men, but humans, when humans do not have a space to express our grief or our rage in a productive, in a way where we can process it and work through it, it turns into violence and volatility from anybody, right? So this can also come from a place of addiction as a coping mechanism for numbness. So if those emotions are not dealt with, and if those emotions aren't supported to be walked through, then we would, as humans, look for numbness, and addiction is part of that. I've seen and been around a lot of addiction in my life, so I completely understand how there is hurt, and then there is the wanting to numb it. And then that can lead to passing that wounding on, right? So lack of emotional tools or models of healthy masculinity can also be something that can lead people down this wounded father path, or men down this wounded father path. If we do not have these coping mechanisms or these ways of healing modeled for us, or ways of being modeled for us, how are we to know how to be, right? Or how to get from this point to this point if it's difficult. This is why our village and community is so important. So if you are being raised by a wounded father, these are some of the things that might show up. So you if you're being raised or were raised by a wounded father. So you grew up walking on eggshells or unsure of what version of him is going to appear. That's that volatility, the instability, and just who are we getting today? I'm not quite sure, and you have to be careful what you say, what you do, because, excuse me, of what might come up. You may have developed hypervigilance or people-pleasing as a safety strategy. So making sure that's part of that walking on eggshells. Is everyone okay? Worried about everyone else's feelings and taking care of everyone else before yourself. And remember, when we're talking about the wounded father and we talk about him being very unstable or volatile, this kind of thing, it doesn't necessarily mean that he's outright violent or outright aggressive, right? This can also be that emotionally unavailable, the detached, the dissociated. So when you come into this hypervigilance and this people pleasing, it's also, as a child of a wounded father is, what can I do to get his attention? That kind of a thing. And when you practice that people pleasing, maybe that is when you have gotten that attention in the past. But so then as a child of someone, I'm not saying me, I'm saying somebody as a child of a wounded father, this is where it would be really important to untangle that kind of belief system. You may also carry shame, emotional confusion, or a general distrust of masculine energy, right? And this can come up if you were raised by a wounded father. And this is for men or women. And then the next one is simultaneously longed for and feared the closeness at the same time, because that's that, who are we getting today? You long to be close, but then also it doesn't feel safe to be close. And that can translate into other relationships beyond that parent-child relationship. So this is why it's so important to acknowledge when you have been affected by a wounded father, if you're stepping into those wounded father type roles, or to avoid them. So some of the questions that you can ask yourself when recognizing this wounded father behavior in yourself, and this isn't whether you're a father or not, this might just be within relationships within your life too, is do I reach for substances or distractions to numb pain? So this is a really interesting to think about just in life in general, not even necessarily the wounded father. Are you avoiding your feelings? Are you avoiding doing the work and wading through the mucky waters of the stuff that doesn't feel good, right? So do I reach for substances or distractions to numb pain? Something to reflect on. Or when you are reaching for that drink, why are you reaching for that drink? I've had an interesting exploration with alcohol the last few years, and it has very much fallen away from me. And I just got to this point where I was like, wait, why am I drinking this? It's poison in my body. And then thinking, okay, wait, how am I feeling? And then there were times where I really wanted a drink. I was like, well, that's interesting. Why do I want one right now? What is overwhelming me, right? What am I feeling? What am I avoiding? Anyways, that's from my own personal experience. Next question. Do I shut down or explode when emotionally overwhelmed? Right? So if you are feeling emotionally overwhelmed, do you go silent? Do you withdraw? Or do you explode? Is everyone around you like, oh, geez, now what? How is she going to, or how is he going to show up today? The next one is, have I unconsciously repeated patterns I swore I'd avoid? Right? If you've ever said, I'll never be like my father, or I'll never be like my mother, I'll never be this person, and then all of a sudden you catch yourself going, oh shit, there it snuck up, right? So have I unconsciously repeated patterns I swore I'd avoid? These questions require us to take a moment to look at ourselves in the mirror and really reflect on, whoa, what are my actions? What are my reactions? And it takes a gross amount of self-responsibility, right? And sometimes that can be really hard and a hard pill to swallow. I read a book, it was, I can't remember the name of it, but I just remember I was reading it, I'll find it. And it was hard to swallow because it was a lot of, like, if you were raised this way, this is what is going to show up. And it was like, oh my gosh, I'm doing these patterns that are recognized in this book of these type of patterns, right? And it was like, that's kind of embarrassing. And also kind of like, man, I have to face that and make a choice on, do I continue down that path or do I make the decision to respond differently? So now we've been talking about these father archetypes, and the wounded father archetype is no different, that they have a sacred invitation. What is this invitation? What is the silver lining of this experience? So the invitation for the wounded father is to heal, to break cycles, and to feel, to deeply feel. When the wounded father turns toward his pain instead of away from it, he becomes the cycle breaker. So we've heard that term, the cycle breaker. I'm here to break a generational trauma, that kind of a thing. He is not perfect, but he is present and powerful in his willingness to evolve. The willingness to look at what needs to change, the willingness to do the work and show up and be an example for the generations to follow, for your generation of other people that are walking beside you that need to do that work as well. So he becomes the man who feels deeply, asks for help, and models what healing looks like for future generations. So thank you so much for joining me today for the wounded father. Some of the things that we can look at for some of the styles, we have creating change is a really good one for the wounded father. So bringing in that change in your life, whether you want to or whether it's arrived unwillingly, because sometimes that happens, right? One called peace and calm. So finding that peace, finding that calm in your heart and in your life, just as you navigate these new waters. And then I also am going to go back to the I am enough one. I really love the I am enough message, because if you are walking in this wounded father energy and you are something that you're working through, sometimes when we look at those icky parts of ourselves, we're like, oh, damn. And like some shame can come up. And then we can kind of detach from the idea that I am enough, but you are enough. We all are enough. And we are all just finding our way, right? Thanks for joining me. We have one more archetype tomorrow, and it is the wise father. So I appreciate you being here as we count down our days to Father's Day.